Okay, we're going to conclude with part 2 of our introduction to civil liberties. And we're going to pick up where we left off with fundamental rights. So we're going to start with the rights of the accused. If you were ever accused of a crime, you have certain constitutional protections that you need to be aware of. There are key components of the Bill of Rights that really protect you. First off being the Fourth Amendment, that you are protected against unreasonable search and seizure. And the Fifth Amendment, where you are protected against self-incrimination. That's why we have the term, you can plead the Fifth. You have your Sixth Amendment, which gives you a speedy and public trial. And you have your Seventh Amendment, which is your protection of having a trial by jury. And the Eighth Amendment, which protects you from cruel and unusual punishment. So let's see how some of those play out. First off, we get to the exclusionary rule. And that builds off of the fact that you are protected against unnecessary and unreasonable search and seizure. The police, when they come into your property, need a warrant. And a warrant really gets specific. It tells you where the police can search, what they are searching for. If the police do not have a warrant, and they go into your house and they seize materials, and they gather evidence illegally, it cannot be used in court. The courts, in the case of Mapp v. Ohio, determined that any evidence that is gathered illegally cannot be used in prosecution of an individual. That's called the exclusionary rule. Now, later court decisions kind of relaxed the exclusionary rule a little bit. There's a lot of backlash against the exclusionary rule on the grounds that it helped criminals get out of jail because they were clearly guilty, but they were let off on a technicality. So the exclusionary rule was relaxed with what's called the good faith exception. If evidence was going to be discovered eventually, or if the police believed they were acting in good faith, if they thought they had a proper warrant and they were executing the warrant in their best of their abilities, then the courts will allow the evidence in. Now, your next thing is the Miranda rights. And from TV shows and movies, people know their Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Those Miranda rights came in the court case of Miranda v. Arizona, where Miranda was coerced and forced into giving a confession, and the courts deemed that that was not acceptable, that every person picked up by the police must be informed of their rights prior to police questioning. Then you have the right to counsel, which was mentioned in the Miranda rights. The right to counsel came about with Gideon v. Wainwright, where the court found that if a person is unable to afford an attorney, that the state has an obligation to provide for the best defense so that a person's rights can be upheld and that the process of the criminal proceedings will proceed in a fair and just manner. Now, another fundamental right that's been looked at very heavily in recent years is privacy. And it starts back with Griswold v. Connecticut. That was a case about laws banning contraceptives for married couples in Connecticut. And the court in that case used the Fourth Amendment, which has your search and seizure protections, and the Ninth Amendment to imply that there is a veil of privacy embedded within the Constitution. Well, that became the basis for the decision in Roe v. Wade, which gave nationalized abortion rights to women. Now, what has happened since Roe is that on a state-by-state basis, there has been a chipping away of the right to choose. You've seen a lot of states put things in place like waiting periods, parental consent, limit on access to abortion facilities. And what's happened is you've had decisions post-Roe, like the Casey versus Planned Parenthood and Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. These cases have allowed states to limit abortions and to place restrictions on abortions, the key being that they can't place an undue burden on the woman. But that is a very vague and term that is open to interpretation. So there's still a lot to be debated in the pro-life versus pro-choice movement.